emotional intelligence to be equally important in life. What is emotional intelligence? Can we have both EQ and IQ? So to discuss and answer all these interesting questions is our guest, Mitali Paul. And Mitali has been to our show. She shared, her journey as a CEO and shared some great lessons on grit the last time. So I'd like to welcome her back. Hello, Mitali. Welcome back.
Lynn.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me back. And yes, this is a very fun topic and a very fun conversation. So I'm hoping that everyone gets to take back some good nuggets from this discussion too. So, a lot of times everyone's very familiar with IQ. When
Yes.
you're talking about intelligence or intelligence quotient, you have tests. People are always curious to know, what is my IQ and how can I make it better? But something lesser heard of is emotional intelligence and EQ, which is the emotional quotient. And as we all know, that is, that's also equally important and sometimes does not get the level of attention that we'd like it to be. So emotional intelligence is really your ability to recognize your own emotions and to be able to manage those emotions. And then also recognize emotions in other people, and you can manage other people's emotions, but you can influence them. And it's an important part of communication, because obviously if you know your audience better, you can be a lot more effective communicator. You can relate to people much better and make a positive impression rather than a negative impression. So it's really about being aware of emotions, seeing how our emotions drive our behaviors, how we impact and influence other people, both positively and negatively, if you're not aware, and learning how to manage those emotions better. So that's what emotional intelligence is.
Yeah, and we've never really thought a lot about it. Like even as kids, it's always your IQ level. What is your IQ level? That is the question everyone asks, correct? So when you came up with this, this idea of talking about it on air and getting us to kind of think, I think that's great because it is important. It's not only has to be part of life, right? Like in our workplace or anywhere in life itself.
Exactly. So at a personal level, it helps you build relationships with individuals, having uncomfortable conversations that a lot of times we have to have with our family members, with our friends. And how do you do it in the most appropriate way, in the most positive way, and in the most impactful and effective way, so that people are getting the right message? And we all know that it's not always the message, it's the delivery. And
Correct.
Emotional intelligence helps you with refining that delivery. So it helps us manage stress, knowing what our triggers are, having that self-awareness. So that's another way where in your personal lives, it can help you manage stress better. And then just making sure you don't hurt other people's feelings, right? It's one thing to speak your mind. It is important to be honest with friends, with family, with loved ones. But how do you get the message in the right way without hurting somebody else's feelings? Being aware of not just your feelings and your triggers, but also the other individual.
So give us an example, for instance.
So, at a personal level. So if I needed to have a difficult conversation with you, right? Instead of attacking your behavior, you want to talk about how the behavior is impacting something that is, so for instance, okay, we're good friends. You said something to me about maybe I'll lose my temper, okay? And you want to get that across to me, and you say, Mitali, I don't like the way you lose your temper. When you lose your temper, you're rude and obnoxious, okay? So if you were to say something like that, where you're directly attacking me, right? Your intent may be that you want me to come across better, and so that's your intent. But I'm going to take that as, she's attacking me directly, and I'm already angry. And then when you say that to me, I have these filters. I'm blocking out the message. So instead of the behavior, if you were to give me feedback on how that behavior impacts our relationship. So, if you were to instead say, Mitali, sometimes we have exchanges and it may turn heated because we're both passionate about what we're talking. But when you get too passionate about what you have to say, you could come across as rude. And that impacts how people perceive you, and they may not receive your message in the right way. It's happened with me where when you start raising your voice, it impacts me because I go into my shell.
Right.
So you see how you've taken that impact, you've taken out the you're rude and you shouldn't be rude, and you've turned that into when you are rude, this is what happens to me. Or when you're perceived to be rude, you're not saying you were rude.
Yeah.
You're saying when you raise your voice, when you get too passionate about something, it comes off as rude. So you're talking about the perception, how you're coming across to the other person. And if you were to value the relationship. So we're friends and I value the relationship. So then I'm focusing on how to repair the relationship and be more sensitive the next time, and not trying to, think about, oh, Lynn called me rude. The focus now is about, oh, if I come across this way, then Lynn and I can't be friends anymore because I'm negatively impacting her. And then it puts skin in the game for me because I care about you and I don't want you to be hurt. Right? So it's just a different way of even conflict resolution. It's like, and for you to be aware enough to talk to me and say, listen, Mitali, because if you come across directly, I may take it as a personal attack and I will block you out. But if you turn that feedback around and say, listen, this is how your behavior impacts something that I care about. I care about our friendship. So if you come to me with that, like sometimes we'll have, a physician or a healthcare provider that gets upset with a patient, and we can't go up to them and say, oh, you can't raise your voice. When you raise your voice, the patient feels intimidated. Can you please be a little bit more cognizant the next time you're talking to the patient? So, immediately you're turning that behavior into what the result of the behavior is and how it impacts someone that the person cares for. You're going to get a lot more response from the person in saying, oh, I can't have my patient feel intimidated. I don't want them to feel, that's not my intent, right? But if I were to say, oh, you keep raising your voice in the clinic, you shouldn't be doing that, that's not going to be received as well. So just a couple of examples.
Yeah, that's great
That's very
examples.
interesting.
Because that really happens in life itself.
I mean, it doesn't have to be in a workplace. It can be in your personal relationships, in your, even with your kids. When you're talking to your kids, how they receive the information. And you made a, interesting comment. You talked about, in kids we talk about IQ, we don't talk about EQ. There's a reason we don't talk about EQ in kids, because emotional intelligence only develops later on in life. So when you think about adolescents and you're like, oh, they're teens, they're acting out. Well, they're not really acting out. They're just being teens. Because neurologically, the amygdala, which is, at your brainstem, that's the place where emotions are, the triggers. When you get scared, right? Your first response is maybe your palms get sweaty, or maybe, your heart starts pounding.
Yes.
It's the amygdala in the brain that actually is the stem of all emotions. So that part of the brain develops a lot later. And when I say a lot later, it's actually in the teens. And, for some people, depending upon what life experiences you've had, it may be a little earlier, or it may be in the early 20s. That's when you get really, emotionally intelligent per se. Doesn't mean that you can't start working on it from before, There's always ways for you to, start working, especially self-awareness. So there's 4, aspects of emotional intelligence that I want to go through. But really at work, it comes useful in resolving conflicts. You can be better and more effective in resolving conflicts if you are more emotionally intelligent when you're coaching and motivating others. right? And this, again, it could be at work, it could be in your personal life. You're trying to coach and motivate someone that's going through a hard time. How do you get the message across to the person that's going to be the most impactful? Not what you're saying, but how are they going to receive it, and how do you make it the most impactful? And then, teamwork and cultural collaboration, and creating a culture of psychological safety. That's another, psychological safety is when you feel comfortable in sharing your opinions freely. You feel safe that there's not going to be retaliation. Again, it could be at home. Maybe you're scared of talking to your spouse or your partner about something that is a trigger for them. Or maybe it's your mother, or it's your mother-in-law, or it's somebody else, or a family, or a friend. But creating that space of psychological safety is knowing that you're able to express yourself freely without any fear of retaliation or fear of misunderstanding.
Yeah. And I think now we stress a lot on that, the self-awareness, the mindfulness, because that is really affecting many of us in this day and age.
Yeah.
We are so into our devices and things like that, we totally forget the one-on-one connection, the communication. It feels like we are going back to,
Yeah.
where we have to learn, and we have to even teach our kids that, right?
Yeah.
Because now we are so much in technology that sometimes we forget that that touch and that the way of talking or communicating and things like that. And
I think the technology influences, right? Like the kids, the way people talk or whatever. There are so many influences coming on them that they don't know how to behave either. I'm just talking because I have little ones at home. So So
And
it's
when in technology, when you have people that prefer to communicate over text,
Right.
rather than pick up the phone and just
that's the
talk.
world we are in right now.
Yeah, that's the
Yes.
world we're in. Now, in a lot of ways, it's very convenient because you can multitask. You can text while you're doing something else. You can have a conversation while you're doing something else. But at the same time, like you said, you can't really exercise emotional intelligence in a text. You can use emojis, but then it's always on the person's interpretation, how they take it.
Yes.
So sometimes you can come off as very curt when you're not meaning to because you're in a hurry and you're typing
Just
something
typed it.
out,
Yes, right.
And then the nonverbal cues are completely lost because there's absolutely no one-on-one communication, like you said. So if you have to express empathy towards someone, or if you have to, really connect and relate to someone, you have to be able to do that in person. And how do you exercise emotional intelligence via email or via text? It's really something that's why it's more important to have one-on-one communication, so that you can make that true connection and be sensitive and be socially aware and be self-aware.
Yeah. Like even for us at the show, like, sometimes when we get people who approach us via email or things like that, I always like to connect with the person by phone. That's the first thing, because I feel, will I have that connection with that guest? Will I be able to communicate and, pass along whatever topic we want to discuss? Because I feel like through email or messaging is just like, okay, that person could be totally different when I meet him or her at the studio. So I think that is so important, just having that personal connection.
Yeah, and that chemistry.
That chemistry, exactly. Same thing at work, and many times I used to work at the pharmacy back in Canada, and for instance, like my boss, he is a wonderful boss, but he always had anger issues, or if he had problems with his wife, he would just bring it at work, and everyone was terrified. There was this fear. So always when he walks in, there's this aura. It's like, okay, you can feel it. Okay, he's in a bad mood today. And you're just trying to not get in his way. You're not even trying to say the good morning to him.
You're
So
walking
those
on eggshells.
things, so those things it's
and
important.
you definitely don't want to be one of those people either at work or in your personal life where you're so not self-aware that you don't realize the impact that you have on other people. So let's talk a little bit about that, because when you talk about emotional intelligence, there's the self-management piece, right? there's the self-awareness piece, and then there's the social awareness and the relationship management. So there's 4 components to emotional intelligence. Now, you can't have self-management unless you have self-awareness, right? Unless I know what my triggers are, unless I know how I come across to people, how I impact them, negative or positive, I can't really do anything about it because I'm not aware. So there, I've run into very, very successful leaders that are very intelligent and very smart, and that's why, I wanted to say it's really emotional intelligence can make or break your career or make or break your personal relationships. Even the smartest of people could have the highest IQ, be very, very intelligent, but are not able to be as successful in their careers or in their personal relationships because they're not emotionally intelligent, because they are, or they may know how they impact people, but they're not self-aware enough to know how to manage it. It's called emotional regulation. It takes a lot of practice to be able to really understand how do you regulate yourself in the moment, right? When you're feeling that anger, or you're feeling that, sadness, or any emotion that is negatively going to impact the person, how do you regulate yourself in the moment? That takes a lot of self-awareness. That takes a lot of practice and control. And so that's where, it takes a long time to get to where you can be. And there are assessments, just like you can take an IQ assessment, you can take an EQ assessment, and you can know what are the areas of your strengths and what are areas that you can do better in. And just like anything else, you sharpen your analytical skills, the same way you can sharpen your emotional skills, your emotional intelligence skills, and do certain things. And there's a couple of tips that I'll provide. But, I want to kind of just talk about the 4 areas. So we talked about self-management. Self-management is your ability to control impulsive feelings. We're all going to have feelings. It's not that you're going to step out all your feelings. We're human, we're going to have feelings. But managing your feelings and managing your emotions in healthy ways, demonstrating your emotions in, behaviors that are positive, taking initiative, following through commitments, being able to adapt to different circumstances. That's really self-management. So, you're going to have stressors, things are going to happen in your life. How do we stay in tune with ourselves? And that's where mindfulness and a few other strategies come into play, because how do I know how I'm feeling? Taking account for how you're feeling in the moment, especially if it's something predictable, you're going into a tough conversation, then you have to take stock of how you're feeling and make sure that you're in control of the conversation. And when you leave the room, you're leaving the person with the message that you intended and not however they perceived it. That's the self-management piece.
We have to go on a short break. I see Laila giving me the cue. So let's take a quick break, and when we return, we'll continue our conversation with Mitali Paul. This is Chai Time on 99.5 FM. Welcome back to Chai Time on 99.5 FM. We are in conversation with Mitali Paul, and we were talking about emotional intelligence and the aspects of it. So let's continue.
Sure. So before we went on break, we talked about one of the attributes, and that's self-management. The second aspect is self-awareness, your ability to recognize your own emotions and how they impact your thoughts and your behavior. How are you acting upon those emotions? And then knowing your strengths and weaknesses, because it helps you build your self-confidence. That's the self-awareness piece. And then you have the social awareness. So you have the self piece, and then you have the others, right? So the social awareness comes in understanding your audience, understanding how other people's, how you can empathize with other people. How do other people receive your communication? How do they pick up on emotional, verbal, and nonverbal cues? Where are they coming from? What space, head space, or, even kind of having that cultural competency to understand where the other person's coming from. Recognize the power dynamics. When you look, you walk into a room, and if you have an important message to deliver in that room, being able to not just manage your own emotions, but getting a read in the room. Who are the influencers? Who are the decision makers? Who do you need to make eye contact with? What are their backgrounds? Where are they coming from? You know, if you're in sales, that becomes very important. Or if you're trying to get funding for a project, that becomes important. So, you know, emotional intelligence can play out in different ways. So that social awareness piece is important, knowing your audience and knowing how you can influence your audience, either positive or negative, right? Mm-hmm. And then the fourth aspect is relationship management. Once you know your audience, how do you develop and maintain good relationships? How do you communicate clearly with the audience? How do you inspire and influence other people? And then how do you manage any conflicts that comes up? How do you manage a team, the team dynamics? All of that comes under the relationship management. So you have self-management, self-awareness, social awareness, and then relationship management. Those are the four key attributes or components of emotional intelligence.
That's interesting. So do companies look at high EQ as a job requirement?
Not so much as a job requirement, but I can tell you that any leadership positions that you apply for or interview for, you always do a personality assessment. And emotional intelligence is one of the pieces. So they may not necessarily ask you for your IQ score or your EQ score, but that personality assessment, or you know, sometimes they call it a leadership assessment. It's hundreds of questions of different scenarios that they're looking for. How do you respond to it? How do you respond to triggers? What's your normal way of responding to different scenarios and situations? And you can't trick these tests because there'll be 120 questions. They'll ask you the same thing in different ways, right? Yeah, and so you can't really, and it's timed, so you can't really say, you know, I'm going to think about it and try and respond to what the person is expecting me to do. You can't really do that. So you can't really trick those tests. So yes, I mean, leadership assessments, personality assessments are almost a mandatory requirement for any executive leadership positions. I've gone through several in my life, and I know it's like, you know, you're trying to overthink those questions, but you can't, because it's really testing you on your ability to process emotions and your ability to react to different situations and how you handle stressors. That's what they're looking for.
All right, that's good to know. So does can EQ be learned or strengthened?
Absolutely. You know, it starts, as we said, it starts with that self-awareness piece. So it's like a journey, right? You can't manage something unless you know about it. So being aware, there's lots of great books. There's assessments that you can take to know what your baseline is and where you are. And then work on areas that you know you are potentially weak at. And the assessments can help you, and sometimes a lot of self-reflection. You can work with a coach, you know, you can have a buddy that knows you well, sees how you respond and react to things, and can give you feedback on that. So, you know, so how do you develop your EQ? The first thing is cultivate and practice self-awareness, right? Knowing that when these are the kinds of things that trigger me. Like, we all have life experiences, we all have filters. So knowing those things that trigger you, either positively or negatively, that's the first step. Right. And then once you've recognized those triggers, it's okay to acknowledge those emotions. We're all humans, we're going to have emotions. Acknowledge them, but know how you're going to deal with them, and make sure that it doesn't impact how you interact with different people. So acknowledging them, and then actively listening. How do you manage social awareness is listening to the other person, not being on the phone when someone's talking or typing an email when someone's talking, but actively listening, paying attention to their nonverbal cues. That tells you where they're coming from, and what kind of, are they feeling anxious? Are they happy? Are they comfortable with you? Do you feel they're in a psychologically safe environment where they can talk openly to you? That's important. That's that self-awareness piece. And seeking feedback, as I mentioned, have a buddy, have someone that's close to you, maybe a family member, maybe a friend, maybe a coworker that tells you, these are some of the things that you do that could be perceived this way. Or, coming out of a meeting, ask someone that was in the meeting, how do you think that went? Could I have done anything better? Those are things that help you see how other people perceive you, because you may have a totally different idea of how other people perceive you. And then empathy. That's important to make a connection with other people, and respond, not react. That's very important.
Respond, not react.
Okay? Assess the situation, think about it, and then respond to it. A response means it's a well thought response. When we react to things, more than likely you're going to do or say something that may not be the most appropriate. Yeah. Right?
That happens often.
It is difficult.
Reaction. It is difficult because you have to literally have that self-control, especially if it's something really there's a conflict.
Yes.
And then it's human nature, right?
Yeah.
You react first. So I love that response.
And it may be just stepping away from that. Understanding, having the self-awareness to think, okay, this conversation's not going well. Yeah. I'm going to later, maybe look back and regret it. So just saying, Lynn, let's continue this conversation at a later time. I think we're both emotional at this point. Let's come back to it. Yeah. Rather than letting it continue and you saying or doing things that you can't take back, right? Yeah. And then you've left a negative impact on the other individual and on that relationship. Sometimes you respond, but you're reacting. You're not responding. Yeah. A response means you think about it and then you present, your opinion or your thoughts. But when we're reacting, we're just reacting to the trigger, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah, that has happened to me, at my restaurant. And I have so many high school, college students that work part-time. And I had an incident where this young server, very strong-headed, and just would not listen to the reason of why he was wrong with with a customer, and he just kept on, and there came a point where I literally had to say, we need to stop this conversation. And I mean, like I said, we cannot have this because we are just going in circles, and it's best that we both take a breather and we come back and revisit it. So because that was I could feel my boiling point. I was going to, and I go, no, because, and I know these students, they work hard, but they are, of course, young, and, they're full of energy, right?
And impulsive, right?
Impulsive, yes, and they're very strong-headed. So, and sometimes I know they like, customers are not always right, which is true in certain ways, but sometimes you got to look at the customer's point of view too. Yeah. And so, I just thought about it like, wow, I went through that and I did okay. I think I got a check mark from Mitali.
Yes. The emotional regulation piece. Absolutely.
I'm on the right track.
So at least you're past stage one, the self-awareness
I'm checking
piece.
things off.
And then you self-manage because you said, let's come back to this later on. So
right.
You also did that. And then you were also socially aware because you could see that he was not receiving the message, you know? And sometimes, again, it's not the message, it's the delivery, because the person's already shut you off at that point and they don't want to listen. You may be making complete sense, but they are so defensive that they don't want to listen. Now, if you let the person sleep over it, you sleep over it, you'd have the same discussion the next day. Down. And the outcome is going to be completely different because you're both not emotional.
Exactly, and as being a boss, it's very easy to just fire the person or let the person go. But when I know this kid has worked with us for so many years, and he's a good kid, and it's just that moment, you know. So I think many times we also think, as we are bosses, we are owners, we can do everything and anything we want. But sometimes in that case, you will lose a good person just because of an incident.
Yes.
So.
And that's where you exercise your empathy too. Good job.
I love this. I might just score 100% today. No, that's great. Like I
Yeah.
think it is important to talk about this, because even there are so many listeners who own businesses, and in our own South Asian community, we have this thing that we are superior. Like we are the ones who write the paycheck, but then also, in the bargain, if when you have incident like this and you don't handle it correctly, you lose these people who are who are really good people and who have worked hard for you.
Yeah.
You lose the good ones.
Yeah, and you're signing off on the paycheck, but it's the blood, sweat, and tears of these
True.
people that are
Yeah.
helping you keep your business going and moving along.
Yeah.
So you have that ethical responsibility of making
Right.
sure you're providing them an environment where they can disagree with you. Because, a lot of times when we talk about conflict, we always think about conflict as a negative thing.
Right.
But conflict actually helps you in situations because you hear somebody else's perspective, and if everyone around you were to just agree with you all the time, I mean, you're obviously not getting a diverse perspective from people. So conflict is not always bad. It's good to be able to disagree, but knowing how to disagree, it's again, how do you manage the conflict where it's fruitful and where it's positive and where it doesn't end up damaging relationships or people.
I find many times, when we approach, our employees, and we approach them in a positive way, in a good way, you get such great feedbacks, or even they come up with such great ideas of how to improve the business itself, because then you become sort of like a family, and it's not just I'm the boss and you work for me and things like that. So this is, what you are sharing with us today is not only for corporate stores, or it's for small business owners. It's even as parents for us too. So this is a great topic, and it's so important to talk and to emphasize on emotional intelligence. So thank you. We're not done yet. I just had to say that.
No, that's great. So, obviously, so you have the recognition of emotions and then the regulation of emotions. And that's where that emotional regulation comes in, is knowing I'm getting angry, so I need to take a few deep breaths. Or I'm getting sad about something, but it's a happy occasion. I need to manage my emotions better. So being able to do that, it takes work, and then setting a good example for others as parents, as business owners, as bosses. You want to set the right tone. You can't tell someone to manage their emotions when you're doing a poor job of it, right? Yeah. If I'm yelling at you and saying, Lynn, you shouldn't be raising your voice, I'm like, okay, that's what am I doing? And why would you even listen to me? Because you're like, speak for yourself, right? And so that's where it becomes very important. And in my professional career, I've seen people lose their jobs. I mean, they're the smartest, the brightest, but I've seen physicians lose their jobs because of poor emotional intelligence. I've seen other leaders not do well and be held back in their careers because of emotional intelligence. I've seen boards fire CEOs for lack of emotional intelligence. And nobody's ever going to fire you for not being bright enough, okay? Yeah. But your behavior can get you fired. Your behavior can damage a relationship. No one's going to give up on a relationship because you're not smart enough. But if you have been, hurt them or been damaging or been a negative influence because of lack of emotional intelligence. So that's why I feel like, more than IQ, you have much more to lose if you don't pay attention to EQ. Yeah. Because when was the last time someone lost a job for not being smart enough? Like, yes, you may not get a job which has technical, aspects to it, because you don't have the analytical skills and you failed, the assessment and things like that. But 9 times out of 10, it's EQ that gets us into trouble more than IQ. So being able to understand the importance of emotional intelligence in your personal and your professional lives is very important, and it all starts with self-awareness.
So do companies now focus also on EQ besides your IQ level? You know, they're trying to encourage that, you know, with people.
So, you know, so you'll have, again, lots of, you know, leadership development programs and different courses that are offered. I work at Houston Methodist, and we have emotional intelligence classes that people get to take. There's lots of leadership. So pretty much all of my managers, I had them go through this emotional intelligence workshop, which is, I think, 2 weeks ago. And then I've asked them to come back to our leadership team meeting and do a presentation of just a quick reflection of, you know, what are the concepts that you learned and how are you going to use that? You know, how do you feel that that's going to impact your performance as a leader? So lots of resources out there. There's books you can read. There's, you know, but lots of companies, they are invested in making sure that, you know, you talk about authentic leadership, you talk about empathetic leadership. All of these terms are a result of that emotional intelligence. You know, you can't be an empathetic leader, or you can't be an authentic leader if you're not in touch with your own emotions, and if you don't know how your emotions impact other people and how you can better manage that and influence people better. So even though it's not, you know, spoken, where they're not gonna, nobody ever asks you for your IQ, nobody ever asks you for your EQ, but there's ways that they're looking for it in the interview process. They're looking for it, you know, in different assessments that they make you take. So it's definitely important.
Yeah. And would you say that would start from the top?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But, you know, in every aspect, each one of us influences people around us, right? And so it's not just, again, it's not just in the workplace. It's important in our day-to-day conversations with people. Even when you're trying to influence your child into coming and maybe visiting you more often, or, you know, there's a way to be able to reach out to them in a way where you're able to relate to them or communicate with them, rather than saying, you got to come and visit me because it's been 6 months since you saw me and I'm your mom and I'm telling you to do that. or
right.
You know, you understand, and you know,
the
how can I bribe them? Exactly. No, don't do emotional blackmail, because that's a typical Daisy thing.
Yes.
You know? We do that. That's actually not nice. It's more being tactful and, you know, being diplomatic about what to say and how to say. Not the emotional blackmail.
No.
I don't want that to be a nugget taken back today. Like, blackmail your people emotionally to get anything.
Which we are so good at as parents. Somehow that comes out. We try and control it, but it gets out of control.
You always tell yourself, I'm not going to be like my parents. And somehow, when you have kids, you know, you end up sounding like your parents. Every once in a while, I'll be like, oh my God, I sound like my mom. And I used to, you know, always reprimand her for doing this to me. And now I find myself doing the same thing with my kids.
Right.
But yeah, being self-aware and understanding, you know, again, what are the positives? What are the negatives? How do we stay away from the negatives? How do we create a more positive environment? And, you know, the messaging. It's not necessary, you know, the message itself, but it's the delivery. It's the messaging. You know, how do you message it in such a way that it is more impactful, the person takes it in the way that you want them to take it, and not the way they interpret based on their filters. So that awareness is important.
So what about young kids? I know you said, like, you know, like, for instance, like, can we have practice emotional intelligence with them as well?
Sure.
Okay.
So, you know, just the fact that, like I was mentioning to you in the break, we were talking. So when I get upset, my daughter can tell. If I'm sad, she can sense it. If I cry, she will start crying without even knowing what I'm crying about. So she has a very high level of empathy, and she's only 6 years old. And I see that she has a very high level of empathy. So I have to know how to cultivate that as a parent and then I have to mirror the behaviors that I want her to learn from me, right? So, you know, the first time I cried, I felt guilty because she started bawling, and I felt, oh my God, I can never cry in front of her. So, you know, I try not to cry in front of her, but then at the same time, I also want her to know it's okay to cry when you're upset, and even grown-ups cry. You know, I hear people say, oh, boys don't cry. And I think, you know, we do that a lot with our boys because, you know, telling them something, we can't shame people for their emotions.
Right.
We're all human. And we need to be able to recognize and process emotions. And I think that's important. You mentioned, you know, it's important to start early in the childhood, because if you have to learn to teach your kids to acknowledge their emotions. Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling angry? And not to shame them with anything. Are you feeling scared? It's okay to be scared. Yeah. It's okay to be angry. But then give them tools on how to manage those emotions, right? So it's not about, oh, you shouldn't be feeling this emotion. You're a boy, you shouldn't be crying. You're a human. You can cry, you know?
Yes.
But when you feel sad, let's think about what's making you sad, and then can you think about a happy place that's going to make you feel happy? Like, how do you process when you're sad? You know, why do we lash out when we're angry, right? And you'll see kids doing that. When they get angry, they don't know how to process that emotion. Right. So they're lashing out, and then we're giving them time out. Or, you know, it kind of escalates because they do something and then we lose our temper over them, and then it just, you know, I'm guilty. I'm here preaching, but I may not always practice because it's hard. But just knowing that it's okay. So being able to talk about emotions is very important.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily always do that as parents because you're like, I'm the role model. I always got to have my poker face on. But we're actually doing. We're actually doing damage by not talking about emotions, because then they're not used to talking about emotions. And if you don't talk about emotions as a child, how are you going to talk about emotions as an adult then? Right. Because it was always, you know, especially negative emotions are shamed. Yeah. You know, it's okay to be happy. It's okay to be, you know, but it's not okay to be sad. It's not okay to be angry, you know. It's okay to be relaxed and, you know, refreshed. So talking about it at home and being human in front of them and apologizing. If you get angry, you say, I know I got angry, but, you know, I'm sorry, but I'll do better in dealing with my anger. So then they start mirroring those behaviors, right? Mm-hmm. Because they see, and for better or for worse, you're your kids' role models, right? You're constantly, they're watching you every single minute. Right. And whatever you do, they mirror those behaviors. So as we work on our emotional intelligence, we're actually doing work for them too, because you are, as you're exercising it yourself, you're setting an example for your kids, you know, for your partner. Right. And then you have those conversations and it's okay to, you know, I know you're sad now, or, you know, why are you throwing a tantrum? Maybe you're sleepy or you're sad. Let's talk about what's going on. Right. Why are you yelling at me? Why did you throw that thing? Can you tell me what's going on? Mm-hmm. And help them put a name to that emotion. Yeah. Is it anger? Is it fear? Is it, you know, you're just hungry? You know, what is it? Acknowledge it, name it, own it, and then say, well, next time you feel the same emotion, here's how we can do it. This is what we can do. This is how we can positively channelize it, right? Yeah. Maybe you just go sit down in your room, take your favorite pillow or take your favorite stuffed toy, or you sit down and just breathe, count backwards from 10 to 1 and just breathe every time you count. Giving them tools, simple tools like that, which a lot of times we can do that too, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So it's so, yes, they don't, you know, their neurological, you know, the way their brains develop, it does take longer for that emotional piece. Yeah. But giving them tools and letting them know that it's okay to feel emotions, it's human, and these are the emotions. This is how you recognize, you know, when, like, do you get butterflies in your stomach? Like, I was asking my daughter, she had her first ballet performance, and, you know, I said, how did you feel on stage? And she was like, oh my God, my stomach felt really weird. So helping her understand, what is that weird? Did you feel butterflies? Like, what exactly? And next time, what do you do? So I told her, the next time, find me in the audience and just look at me and nobody else right there, right?
Yeah.
And you do that. And I remember doing that as a kid every time I went on stage. And so simple tools like that where you're teaching them self-awareness, where they're not just flying off the rail, not understanding why they're responding, because then you're giving them tools to deal with adolescents when they are going to be flying off the rails because of their hormones.
Yeah.
Again, their bodies are changing.
Right.
Okay? They may not necessarily think or process thoughts, but if you've laid the foundation, at least they know this is how I feel today. And they're able to talk to you comfortably about it. Why did you get in trouble in school? Because I was feeling angry, because someone bullied me, and that's why, I said or did this.
Yeah.
How can we do something different next time? Don't reprimand them for having the emotion, but how do you process it?
Yeah. And I must say before I end that, kudos to Layla, because Layla is a great mom. The way she handles, honestly, because the way she handles the two boys, I've always been, working. Yeah. And so I've not really been a at-home mom. So when I see Layla and I see the way she handles her two boys, because her, boys are
Especially
totally
boys
different.
And my younger
but
one
the
is
way
a
she
child.
communicates and the patience and everything,
Yeah.
I think she gets 100% score today too. As a parent.
Thank you.
For sure. But thank you so much, Mitali, for joining us this morning. It was such a great topic and really, to talk about this, not only in at the workplace, but in life itself. So thank you so much for coming here and talking about emotional
Taking the
intelligence.
time, yes, it was very intriguing.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are just like the time.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning in to Chai Time this morning. We shall see you same time next week. Signing off, Chai Time on 99.5 FM.